real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Werewolf Vs My Husband. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am married to a man who holds down a full-time job and also hunts to provide us with food to feed ourselves and our 2 kids who were in junior high school when this story happened. He is a good man, but this is a story about a very strange conflict that arose between us. You see, my husband hates a creature that I befriended and wants him removed from the planet. The most complicated part of all this is that this creature I befriended is some kind of a predatory carnivorous dogman. Our family lives in central Pennsylvania in a fairly rural area that's surrounded by even more rural areas. There are legal hunting grounds in every direction, at least during parts of the year, and my husband Jake has 3 freezers downstairs to store the meat in. He hunts every available day, and we live off that meat until the next hunting season comes along. But a few years back during the pandemic, he got into some sort of a feud with a dogman, and our life began to get sorta strange. When this started, I didn't know what a dogman was, other than the cartoon dogman in the books my kids used to read. When Jake first came home ranting about the dogman competing for the same game, I thought he was talking about some man. I just thought he was being insulting. That dogman stole my buck, like he was comparing another guy to a dog or something. It took a week of him ranting about this new enemy before I finally slowed him down and asked him to explain what the heck he was going on about. When Jake began telling me that he was being stalked by a large dog or wolf that walked on its hind legs, I burst out laughing. I had never heard of such a thing, and my reaction was to ask him to get serious and to explain what was actually making him upset. But it turned out Jake was being dead serious. This creature, it looked like a dog but walked like a man, at least some of the time. Jake was convinced it was following him in the forest, allowing him to corner game, and then at the last second swooping in and carrying off the meat that my husband had intended to feed his family with. Jake wasn't upset over hurt pride or losing some peeing contest. He was upset because we weren't going to have meat to eat if he didn't figure out what to do about all this. And my husband's plan for dealing with this was not to negotiate with the beast. My husband's plan was to wipe that animal man off the face of the earth. He was looking into heavier weaponry, and that's when he made friends online with this guy who I'll call Firebringer. This guy is a bit scary, but Jake gets along with him. He is a firearms expert and collector, and he agreed to hunt with Jake for a while, at least until the dogman situation became neutralized. So the next angry story I had to calm Jake down after was about how the dogman moved too fast to be hit by bullets. The 2 hunters stalked a big old buck deer. I forget how many points, but a big one. They had him cornered, and so Jake told Firebringer to be ready to bring the fire. This was usually when the dogman would show up. Sure enough, the second my husband opened fire on that venison, this big werewolf-looking monster man showed up, and Firebringer started squealing like a little girl. He was screaming in a high-pitched voice like a scared little baby. But fortunately, his instincts took over, and his trigger finger went crazy. Cartridges flew all over the place as he missed the dogman and then missed him again and again and again, always just barely behind the lightning-fast monster. Now, the positive part of this was that the creature kept on running. It didn't stop to try to steal the deer. So I don't think they scored any hits on it, but my husband and Firebringer got that deer and split it between them. Jake still wanted to assist the dogman in departing this mortal coil, however. Getting half the meat we needed was better than getting none, but Jake is a man who wants his family well fed. He would be ashamed if any of us went hungry, I know him. So this was a life or death thing for my husband, and honestly, I kind of felt bad for that old Dogman. And then, I had my own experience with the beast. And let's just say, it was eye-opening. Now, I am not a hunter, I am a wife and a mother. I've worked day jobs at points, and during that period, I was doing part-time work from home for my old office. I was on Skype for 2 or 3 hours most weekdays with my co-workers, and then I had to scramble to clean the place up and pick up the kids and make dinner before Jake got home. If dinner was late, then he would be late getting out to hunt, so I made sure dinner was never late. During that period, for about 7 or 8 months, we only had one car, and Jake had it during the day. I realized I was missing some things I needed for dinner, and I wanted to walk to the grocery, but the small one within walking distance was forced to close during the pandemic. I had no car to drive to the big box retailer, so I called a neighbor and asked for a favor. They did have what I needed, and so I ran outside and took the shortcut through the woods to get to their house. They wanted to chat once I got there, and I couldn't be rude, but my eye was on the time, and eventually I had to beg off and run. I was trotting home because I knew I was running out of time. I realized I was going to have to walk to the school and meet the kids while carrying the bags of spices that our neighbor had so kindly shared with me. My mind was going 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I must not have been watching where I was going because suddenly my ankle was screaming out in pain. Looking down, I saw that I had stupidly stepped into a hole in the dirt, and if I hadn't stopped the very second that I did, I might have torn my ankle up disastrously. I mean, I would have torn a tendon or broken some little bones or something. As it was, my ankle was in excruciating pain, and I started to scream and moan. I thought I sounded very dramatic and very pathetic, but I couldn't stop making those sounds. I don't think I'd ever really been injured before, other than some cuts and scrapes. I mean, this was hardly life-ending, but in that moment I was nearly going into shock, and my heart started to hurt in my chest. It was beating that hard. I quieted down into some crying, and I gently worked my foot out of that little crevice in the ground. I rubbed my ankle and foot with one hand, even as I filled the hole in with rocks and pebbles and some muddy dirt that I hoped would harden into a solid surface and never hurt anyone else again. Then, after the ankle stopped hurting quite so much, I stood up and tried putting some weight on it. Big mistake. I felt so much pain in my ankle that my eyes saw lightning. I'm not even kidding. That was sort of what it looked like, almost as though I were seeing the pain itself in the form of pure whiteness. I lost my balance and fell backward, screaming again because this fall was about to be very painful. Except it wasn't. Except I fell backward into what felt like a living fur coat, super soft and warm. I was caught by the fur coat man, who lifted me off my feet. I looked up to see who my gallant rescuer was, and I saw a face out of a horror movie. It was like a bear with a dog's face, sort of. Except it had these arms like a bodybuilder. A human bodybuilder, I mean. But covered all over in the softest fur. Okay, so I screamed again and I tried to pull back, but where was I gonna go? It hurt a lot less to be up in the air than it was gonna feel to be back down on the ground. Rather than try to escape, I just gave up and sort of prayed he wouldn't eat me. It isn't like I could have run away, right? I had never really doubted my husband talking about the Dogman once I was sure he wasn't pulling my leg, but understanding that I was now being carried around by the beastman that my husband Jake had sworn to terminate was an uncomfortable and surprising experience. It did not make me happy. So the Dogman kept sort of whining and grunting and gesturing with his nose in different directions. I thought he was spazzing out, but then I realized he was asking me where I wanted to go. I quickly snagged my spice bags up off the ground and gestured the way I needed to go. Rather than continue to hold me in front of him, the dog-headed bear man sort of tossed me under one wet, smelly, hairy armpit and started walking toward my kid's school. I protested this as much as I could, and so he helped me up onto one of his massive shoulders. I felt a bit of vertigo to be up that high off the ground, but on that afternoon, I got to ride upstairs in the bus, you might say. My brain was spinning, and it felt like I was dreaming, or more accurately, having a nightmare. I was telling a dogman which way to walk, almost as though I were a jockey on a horse, and I was directing him toward my children's school. Then it dawned on me that maybe it might be irresponsible to ride a monster into a school area, a monster that my own husband had sworn to eliminate, no less. So I stopped the dogman at the edge of the woods, and I could see my two kids off in the distance talking to a friend of theirs. Then that kid got picked up by his mom in a Buick, and my two babies were the only ones left. I called out to them, and they looked around confused. I called again, and my daughter looked in my direction, becoming sort of frightened looking. Both of them walked tentatively off the sidewalk over the lawn toward the woods, where they could eventually see that I was clinging to the shoulder of a very large hairy monster. Both of my kids looked a little bit confused, and I felt terrible for doing this to them. Suddenly my daughter saw what was happening and began crying. I told her, "Baby, don't cry, Mom's all right. This big monster is helping Mommy, that's all." It didn't stop her from crying, though. And that's when I felt myself lowering toward the ground and slipping off the monster's shoulder. He seemed to be melting, becoming smaller. Suddenly I was clinging to the shoulder of He-Man from that old cartoon. He hid his nakedness from my kids, told them both it was safe, and asked them to follow us through the woods to get home. Then I was flying up into the air again, and my poor daughter was screaming and weeping. The man had once again become the Wolfman. My son wasn't crying, though. He thought this was cool, and he grabbed my daughter's hand so that she would feel safe enough to follow. Then began the strangest parade home from school of all time. I was riding a monster who was actually a big naked bodybuilder underneath it all. Not a story I've ever repeated to my mom, I can assure you. So the monster man carried me home and gently slipped me off his shoulder into the rocking chair in front of our house. Then he started sniffing around, seemingly very interested in something. "He's smelling Dad," my son cried out excited. "My dad has sworn to kill you," he told the Wolfman, giggling hysterically. I could tell my kid was hoping to get to witness just that, in front of his own eyes. I confirmed to the werewolf what my son was saying, and I think I could tell by the look in the werewolf's eyes that he had already begun figuring that part out. At least I think I could. Canine expressions can sometimes be a bit mysterious to me. I wanted this wolfman to understand that my husband had a real reason to fight him. I told the dogman that we barely had enough meat for ourselves. I explained that my husband was not a bad man, but he was scared of his family going hungry. The dogman kept smelling around as though he were ignoring me. Then, suddenly without warning, he ran off toward the woods, crashing loudly into the underbrush as my son shouted, "There he goes!" My son started to run after the monster into the woods, but I grabbed the back of his shirt and told him to help his mother back into the house. He was like, "Aw, Mom," but he's a good son, and he did as he was asked. I was already beginning to be able to put a little weight on the ankle, and it was clear nothing was broken, so that was a relief. Still, I'm not sure how I would have gotten my kids home from school without that werewolf guy that my husband had such a grudge fight going on with. Although I was getting around with the aid of my grandmother's old cane and I was making dinner, the ankle still ached, and it was going to continue to for another few days. When my husband Jake got home, our son blurted everything out. Then our daughter started crying all over again, and Jake could tell that my son wasn't joking. I admitted that the story was true, and I pulled up my pant leg to show my badly black and blued ankle and foot. I told him I couldn't have gotten home without that Dogman, and our son corrected me that it wasn't a Dogman. It was a werewolf. Then we both told Jake that it was really a man and not an animal at all, and my husband got really angry and called us both liars. He called us crazy, too. His eyes looked scared. He and the Firebringer had shot at that beast, and now I was telling him that it was a man. I was saying stuff that no hunter ever wants to hear. Jake shouted at us that he would never shoot at a man. That was a bear-sized dog. It was not a human. He shouted it louder and louder. But then our son joined our daughter in crying, and I could see Jake was beginning to accept that we were not lying to him. But werewolves aren't real, he screamed. I reminded him that a lot of people didn't believe in Dogman either. Life is weird, I said, shrugging my shoulders. I was too exhausted to fight over it. The truth is the truth is the truth, no matter how unhappy and grouchy it makes you to realize this. Then Jake's eyes got wide, and he said Firebringer's actual name. Firebringer was out there, in the woods, solo hunting for the Dogman. Jake realized he had to find his friend and stop him from hunting that creature, prevent him from doing something he might never be able to forgive himself for, something that he might go to jail for, or worse. Because that annoying animal that the two of them had been trying to hunt down and snuff out, well, that beast was actually a man, a human being. And a human being is a kind of an animal that has no hunting season. Jake ran out into the night hoping to prevent a tragedy. The kids and I ate dinner alone without their father, nervously listening and waiting for his return. And then we heard it. A blast almost like a large firecracker out in the woods. Someone had fired a weapon. Then a squealing sound. Was that a dog? Was that the werewolf? It was hard to tell what we had just heard. It might have been a bird. Well over an hour later, Jake came home looking exhausted. He told us that he was finally able to reach the Firebringer by cell phone, only to find out that he had decided to stay home and nap instead of hunt. All that energy wasted for nothing. Firebringer was never even out looking to bag himself a werewolf on that night. We told Jacob the sounds we had heard, and he looked a bit concerned. Then he wearily shrugged his shoulders and reasoned, well, at least it's not our problem, and we all laughed in relief. He was right. Whatever we had heard, at least it wasn't our karma playing out. At least we hadn't caused that to happen. And we never did find out what happened that night. Maybe someone else got angry at that werewolf and took him out. Maybe he just ran away after I warned him about my husband. Maybe those sounds we heard had nothing to do with any of this. Or maybe we heard someone out in the night dispatching the monster that carried me home on that strangest of all strange afternoons. Whatever it was that happened, I've never seen the werewolf again, and Jake has never mentioned him again either. I like to think he left when I suggested to him that he should. I like to think he found some other hunting ground elsewhere in Pennsylvania. But maybe he went to the happy hunting ground, who knows. He really was a lifesaver to me that one day. I feel like we could have become friends, but it just wasn't meant to be. Alpha males feuding over resources, what can you do? I'll always be grateful to my big giant werewolf rescuer. But still I'm glad that my husband Jake won out in the war between Werewolf versus my husband. Aaron Locke, or is it Aaron Locky? He stops the clock and he's awful cocky. Actually, I don't know if Aaron is cocky any more than I know how to pronounce anyone's last name. But I do know that he is a new channel member of this channel, and that we have him to thank for this brand new episode. Thanks, Aaron. If you would like to join Aaron in helping this channel stay alive, then listen to what this next little guy has to say. Henry? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.